The Jonbenet Ramsey Case Top Suspects, Part 3. Burke Ramsey. The Ramseys' oldest child, 9 years old at the time of Jonbenet's death, was Burke. He reportedly had several instances of misbehavior toward his sister Jonbenet. Accidentally or not, reportedly, he hit her with a golf club so severely that she required a visit to the hospital. It was learned that there were 2 strikes to Jonbenet, not one as commonly known. Burke was admittedly not as attended to by his parents as Jonbenet, which in many cases may lead to outbreaks of jealousy and lead to retaliatory verbal and physical attacks. Although it is not known if Burke was diagnosed with these behavioral problems, it cannot be denied that Patricia Ramsey, Burke's mother, dedicated most of her attention to her younger child, Jonbenet. This is because Jonbenet was about 3 years younger, and because she was heavily invested in her participation in the beauty pageant competitions for several years. Their success in this little beauty queen business must have only intensified Patsy's dedication and attention to Jonbenet, as well as her possible neglect of Burke. Burke was admittedly heavily into video games, additional indication of possible neglect from his family. Additionally, John Ramsey, Burke's father, was a successful businessman who traveled often and likely worked long hours. He was reportedly distanced from his kids, often opting to tend to business matters instead of his family's activities. Because of possible violent and retaliatory behavior from Burke, it is believed that he may have unintentionally and fatally hurt Jonbenet on that fateful night of December 25, 1996. The strongest evidence that suggests Burke may have been involved is the bowl of fruit and the cup of tea found on the kitchen table by Boulder police the morning of December 26. After Jonbenet's murder, these had Burke's fingerprints on them. The fact that not anyone in the family ever claimed responsibility for placing the bowl of fruit and the cup of tea on the kitchen table raises suspicions squarely on Burke. First, the Ramsey parents claim that Jonbenet and Burke both went to bed immediately or shortly after, arriving home on the night of December 25, around 10 p.m. And John and Patsy claim to have gone to bed shortly after as well, preparing for their planned flight out of state early the next morning. The problem is that Jonbenet's autopsy revealed she likely ate fruit prior to going to bed, since traces of a fruit-like material was found undigested, likely pineapple. Furthermore, Burke's fingerprints were found on the tall glass with a tea bag found close to the bowl. Milk or cream was added to the fruit, and an oversized spoon was in the bowl, all of which indicate childish actions. This evidence, the undigested pineapple, the unaccountability of who placed the items on the table, Burke's fingerprints, and the childish manner of the items used, all suggest that both Jonbenet and Burke had something to do with these, and may have been up late into the night on December 25. It is unclear that they were up while the Ramsey parents were also up in the kitchen or alone, but it must be admitted these remain possibilities. However, during police interviews, the parents have always denied being up with their children that night. Burke has also denied being up in the kitchen that night, and suspiciously denied knowledge of the bowl in the table or what it may have contained during a one-on-one police interview. The leading Burke did it theory was popularized by the 2016 CBS documentary, Who Killed Jonbenet Ramsey? It goes as follows. Burke and Jonbenet were up and near the kitchen table upon their return to their home on December 25, perhaps grabbing a late-night snack. Burke may have prepared the pineapple and milk in a bowl, and playfully put a tall glass with a tea bag on the table while Jonbenet was there with him, perhaps copying adult actions in a playful manner. The child likely grabbed the first spoon he could find to eat the fruit, and perhaps Jonbenet unexpectedly stole a piece of fruit from the bowl and ran off with it. Burke, perhaps tired and enraged, grabbed a heavy object and hit Jonbenet over the head with it. Jonbenet, rendered unconscious, fell to the ground and Burke did not know what to do, and perhaps poked her with the train tracks rather roughly to see if she would wake. These explain the strike to the head, and the marks on Jonbenet's body which match the protruding ends on a toy train track found in the house. Children may do these actions suddenly. I recall as a child I did something similar where I was playing with my siblings and I hit my younger sister on her forehead by spring-loading a spoon with my hand, causing a severe cut and bleeding that required rushing her to the hospital. In the end, I did not intend to hurt her. Instead, I recall wanting to experience the result of my actions in childish excitement. I can also see how a neglected child, as I was myself, may unintentionally cause great harm by experimental and thoughtless actions. Likewise, Burke may have engaged in such sudden violent behavior, and in a rapid, thoughtless, unsupervised decision, he hit Jonbenet over the head with a heavy object. The object was perhaps a heavy Maglite flashlight, later found in the kitchen table by police. Interestingly, no fingerprints were found on the flashlight, and there is evidence of it being wiped clean, inside and out. This theory follows that the Ramsey parents found the scene much later, where Jonbenet was fatally hit by Burke. Too late to save her, they reasoned, then proceeded to cover up the deadly incident by staging a kidnapping and an assault. Admittedly, this theory has several major problems. If indeed Burke hit Jonbenet and the Ramseys later found the scene, their first expected reaction would be to call 911 and seek medical help for their daughter. To shrug and quickly craft a complicated crime scenario and conspire to maintain it all hidden is a tall order. Especially both parents and Burke conspiring in such a way. Plus, their motive for doing all of this is weak, to avoid possible accountability for their son's actions. Burke was 9 at the time, would have faced little repercussions, and the whole deal would have been ruled a tragic accident. And, to protect the family's image is even less likely. The parents must have known these if in their right mind. And there's no indication the parents were not in their right mind during this time. With no fingerprints or DNA found on the flashlight or any other possible objects that Burke may have used to hit Jonbenet, there's no direct evidence linking Burke and the blow to the head. Burke has always maintained he did not hit Jonbenet with any object that night. And the force required to inflict the damage done to Jonbenet's skull is disputed as even being possible by a 9-year-old boy. Also, the hit to the head may not have been fatal, prompting the question, why would the Ramseys opt not to seek medical help? I believe, even if it was obviously too late to save the child, the parents would be expected to seek medical or police help. I also find it unlikely that Burke alone would attempt any cover-up. Instead, it would be likely that after the incident he would just run off to his room and hope all would be well the next morning. Especially unlikely are elaborate actions such as thoroughly cleaning the flashlight, to include its batteries, and staging a sex crime complete with a garrote. Although there are suggestions Burke was up during the infamous 911 call from Patsy. In an audio study of the recording of the call, there seem to be 3 different voices in the house. One seems to be a child's voice. It is difficult to make out exactly what the child's voice said, but among the interpretations was, "What did you find?" If in fact Burke was up during the 911 call, and indeed asked this question, then there are a slew of complications that would need to be addressed. Why did the Ramsey parents always maintain that Burke was unaware of what happened and apparently asleep in his bedroom during the whole ordeal? There was a shoe print near where the body was found which had a high-tech mark on it, indicating the shoe brand. After years of the Ramsey parents denying this fact, Burke eventually admitted that he did indeed own a pair of high-tech shoes at the time. But as he rightfully remarked, "So what if my shoe print was there? I used to play down there all the time." Ultimately, no known empirical evidence linked Burke directly to the crime. In other words, his DNA was not found on any possible weapon on the body or place, where it could not be explained by innocent behavior. Most importantly, per the police's priority since 2008, Burke did not match the unknown male's touch DNA found on Jonbenet's clothing. John Ramsey. Statistically speaking, the most likely person in the Ramsey household to have committed the crime is John Ramsey. Although there is no known direct evidence that links him to the crime over the years, theories have surfaced that rely on existing circumstantial evidence. While many argue that the lack of direct evidence is only possible because John contaminated the crime scene, others say that all evidence contamination has been accounted for by now. John married Patsy after a reportedly nasty separation involving suspicions of infidelity in his last marriage. He reportedly had a relatively frustrating and tragic past, where he lost an adult daughter to a tragic accident, and his career took a few tumultuous turns. Proponents of John's likely hidden abnormal behavior point to these stressors of his past. Furthermore, they say he was detached from his family. After settling as a successful businessman in Colorado, he was reportedly very busy and somewhat distanced from his family. Critics point out several missed family events and instances of inattention to his kids and wife. Despite these suspicions and accusations, John has no criminal record, served honorably in the U.S. Navy for a short period, and has very little reports of being anything other than a calm, smart and collected man that loved his family. But the circumstances that bring John under suspicion are many in this murder case. He was the only adult male with unimpeded access to Jonbenet at the time of her murder, allowing for ample opportunity for foul play. He admittedly broke the basement window, the most likely place of entry by an intruder into the house. He reportedly behaved suspiciously during the initial hours of the investigation. He destroyed and contaminated the initial crime scene, many think deliberately. To many, John became closed in and overly defensive early in the investigation, and later seemed not as interested in finding the murderer. The ransom note included elements that John, more than anyone else in the home, may have known, like a monetary demand close to the amount of a recent bonus he was awarded, in addition to then-recent movie memes, arguably more popular among males. A dog-ear-marked dictionary page containing the word incest was found in the home. Lastly, John's cooperation with police and during interviews seemed rehearsed, guarded, vague, and sticking to a script. John, being the only adult male in the Ramsey household, had easy access to Jonbenet. This clearly made him a statistical and automatic suspect. But this was exacerbated by the fact that entry points to the house were few, and only one had very faint signs that an intruder may have violated it, the basement window. But even this entry point is a subject of heated debate as to the likelihood of it being used the day of the murder. No DNA, fibers, or objects were ever found as definitely belonging to a would-be intruder, although hairs from an unknown person were found on the blanket Jonbenet was wrapped with and her underwear, and an unknown male's trace DNA was recovered from Jonbenet's clothing. However, the body was contaminated by many people, and Jonbenet came in contact with even more people the night of December 25th when she was alive. So, it is difficult to determine the meaning of most of the DNA evidence. These facts point the finger at the most likely internal perpetrator, John. The sexual nature of the crime strongly suggests it was the action of an adult male. And the care with which the body was handled after death suggests an emotionally attached perpetrator. It must be said that the police focused on John initially, but then some of the focus shifted away from him, as the police considered other suspects. Remarkably, John admittedly broke into his house months earlier, using the infamous basement window after being locked out. This very window was later suspected by investigator Lou Schmidt of being used by an intruder the night of the murder, and demonstrated its feasibility himself. But initially there were no significant signs of a break-in through that window for months, as there was a photographed spider web attached from the crate covering access to the window, unlikely to have been weaved after the murder. And there were almost no disturbances around the window, nor any prints or signs of it being used as an entry or exit point, especially by a perpetrator in deep darkness. However, later on, a scuff mark on the basement wall, leaves from the yard found in the basement, some signs of disturbance on the outside of the window, and an unidentified palm print and boot print, were all found in investigation photographs. These, although compelling, could not conclusively point to an intruder, as any of these could have innocent explanations. Apart from the irony of this obscure window being likely used by both John and the perpetrator, it begs two questions. What dire circumstance would lead John, a large and older man, to break and crawl through a very small window? The mere fact of forgetting the keys inside seems a bit reaching, when admittedly several people had key copies to their home, like the housekeeper, friends, and even contractors. Critics point out that this window was probably an attempt for John to take the body outside of the home, and this was prevented by overtaking circumstances the morning of December 26th. And it is curious that the Ramseys' basement window remained broken for months, with shards of glass still littering the basement floor and all. Especially in a home with housekeeping on payroll, and when Patsy seemed obsessively attentive to her home in every other way. Lastly, It seemed strange that John was initially so eager to admit that he had broken the window and entered through it months prior. Some may say, almost as if setting up the stage for the possibility that someone may have indeed exploited this entry point after he broke in through it and carelessly left it unfixed. John had behaviors many thought out of place, before and after finding his murdered daughter. First, after Jonbenet is reported missing and assumed the victim of a kidnapping, John is reported to have been detached, distanced, and uncomforting to his wife Patsy. Then he goes missing for close to an hour. At resurging, he claimed to have been picking up the mail. A strange claim, as the mail was later determined to be routinely delivered to Ramsey's front door. Then he seems to ignore the fact that 10 a.m. came and went, the deadline of the incoming call described in the ransom note. This important call would have instructions for the possible safe return of his daughter. Many point out this behavior as having prior knowledge that the Ramsey claims were fake. And this is corroborated by the claim that John recommended calling the police, clearly indicating a disregard for the deadly warnings against doing just that. Initially, when the investigating police suggested that John and his friend Fleet White look for anything out of place around the house, John immediately goes directly to the most obscure and remote room in the house, a basement closet, and finds his dead daughter there. This fact is considered more than a coincidence by many. And there are reports John screamed before turning on the lights in the closet where the body was found, which was said to be completely dark. The police officer at the scene, Linda Arndt, highly suspected John of being involved in some way when Jonbenet's body was found, especially after he placed her stiff body on the ground and asked if in fact his daughter was dead. After determining that Jonbenet had in fact been murdered, and after the initial chaos and shock of the finding, among John's first actions were to attempt to prepare a flight to leave the scene, and to seek separate legal representation for him and Patsy. These clearly raised suspicion toward John, as he alone arranged these. Some say that John deliberately contaminated and destroyed the initial crime scene around Jonbenet's body. When he found her, he did not leave it in place and perhaps checked for vital signs as his friend Mr. White notified the police and medics. Instead, he completely removes it from the scene, removes the duct tape from her mouth, leaving it to his very vague and sketchy memory as to how the body was found. And he deposited and transferred his DNA and likely hair and clothing fibers to the body and other objects, rendering it almost impossible to determine when and how this evidence was put on there. Not only that, but John brought the body over to where everyone was gathered, the living room, further transferring DNA and other materials to the body. It must be admitted that an innocent parent, upon finding such a horrific scene, may behave in a manner to attempt to save their child. But removing the body instead of summoning help to it in its place seemed deliberate to many. John became very defensive early into the investigation. In fact, within hours of finding his daughter's body, he was lawyered up and seemed determined to avoid talking to police. He attempted to fly his remaining family out to Atlanta the very morning of the murder, and told the police to give him some time before answering further questions about the situation. In fact, the Ramseys seemingly preemptively went on a national TV interview days after the murder, and long before being officially interviewed by the police separately. This was seen as an outrageous blunder for the police to permit, and a highly suspicious move by the Ramseys. In fact, it was many months after the murder that the Ramseys finally agreed to be interviewed by the police, and even then, only under strict conditions put forth by their lawyers. In my opinion, the Ramseys indeed were the ones that initially manufactured the high national interest of their tragedy, starting with their appearance on national TV days after the murder. Then later, they repeatedly blamed the media for making a spectacle of their tragedy. Even John's best friend at the time, Fleet White, became frustrated with Ramsey's apparent lack of cooperation with the police investigation, claiming they were hiding behind their lawyers. Official police interviews happened only a few times, and under very controlled and limited conditions, as put forth by the Ramsey attorneys and green-lighted by the Boulder's district attorney. Also, finding the murderer became something of a second priority to the Ramseys, apparent during their few recorded TV interviews. The Ramseys indeed put plenty of roadblocks for cooperation with police, all whilst publicly claiming they would meet with police and answer any questions, anytime, any place. During the few police interviews that eventually took place, the Ramseys were guarded and overly defensive, and reluctant to provide even basic details on just about every question. Even Burke seemed guarded and tight-lipped when asked basic questions by police, especially about the bowl of pineapple photographed on their kitchen table. Lastly, there were a few aspects of the ransom note that matched John's expected knowledge and vocabulary. The infamous ransom amount demanded in the note, $118,000, was very close to the amount received by him that year as a company bonus payment of $118,117.50. And words like tactics, monitor, attaché, and exhausting are words more likely present in John's everyday high-stakes computer business, as opposed to words likely used by a small foreign faction. Although most writing analysts could not find enough similarities to John's handwriting to pin him as the author of the note. Also, there were quotes in the note that were likely known to John during that time, certainly more than a would-be member of a foreign faction. Quotes were seemingly ripped straight from recent American films like Dirty Harry, Speed, and Ransom. John is reported to have been an avid movie watcher, reportedly having a makeshift movie theater in one of his past homes, and owning and displaying several movie posters over the years. The ransom note was also full of over-the-top and violent threats, likely inspired by movies, and likely the concoction of a male author. A dictionary book found in the Ramsey home reportedly had a dog-ear-marked page that contained the word incest. There is some fuzziness as to the validity of this claim, but if true, questions arise as to if this was just a coincidence or someone in the household looked this word up for a particular reason. It is unclear if the word was directly marked, and if the dictionary was even open to this page. Marcel Elfers posits that Patsy likely looked up the word after she suspected or found out that John was committing this criminal act with his daughter. If so, she may have been preparing for a serious accusation, either personal or legal. Problems with this theory are many, including the possible coincidence of this finding, and the credibility of it being even true. There may also be innocent reasons for looking and marking the word. Also, if indeed the word was clearly marked, it must be known when and who found it and where was the book when found. Interestingly, there was a book found in the Ramseys' bedroom, about a story with a murder victim where a rope and duct tape was used. Lastly, during many recorded interviews, John's body language seemed suspicious to many, and his words seemed guarded and sticking to a script. To many he did not come off as open, honest, and spontaneously speaking from memory. He also seemed to expect Patsy to say certain things. And at least at one point during the CNN interview, to me he seemed to try to control Patsy's words. He does this by intensely looking at her as she speaks, and seemingly ensuring she knows he's watching her. In one occasion when she speaks he notices the obviousness of his behavior and quickly seems to stop himself and looks down, as if trying to appear emotionally down. Likewise, during the several official police interviews, John's answers were very short, guarded, and vague, leaving out details and avoiding certainty at every step. He did not offer almost any information that was not asked. To me this is a clear defensive stance and not one to aid or help advance the case. The only thing he remained overly certain about was his and his family's non-involvement in the killing, accidental or not. One of the leading theories that blame John for the murder is that of Dr. Cyryl Wetch. And it's among the boldest and most accusing of the John did it theories. He paints John as a closeted sick pedophile who to this day has not admitted guilt. John, the theory goes, after losing sexual access to his wife due to her ovarian cancer, is desperate for sexual gratification. He is believed to routinely sexually molest his daughter, and performs risky sexual acts that lead to her accidental death. His theory is supported by the autopsy's discovery of evidence of possible chronic penetration of Jonbenet's genitalia. It is also based on the assumption that the garrote and strangulation, not the blow to the head, was the cause of death. Dr. Cyryl Wetch posits that the garrote is a sexual game device, used to arouse sexual partners during intercourse by limiting oxygen to the brain, with the inherent danger of it cutting enough oxygen to cause death. Wetch presents the death as accidental, and a cover-up was performed to include the blow to the head, writing the note and redressing and hiding the body to later dispose of it. His theory further posits that John attempted to remove the body through the basement window, but could not. As it turned too late to do anything with the body, John instead hid it in a nearby closet. Problems with any theory in which John is accused as committing the murder are many. DNA, fingerprints, or other evidence from John found on the body and the crime scene was largely considered not incriminating. That is because the investigation was flawed, evidence was destroyed, disturbed, and/or contaminated, as John removed the body from its place, touching it and just about every other thing in contact with the body, thus depositing what would appear as innocent evidence on all those items, including the duct tape which he immediately removed. Another problem is that John made extensive personal, legal, and financial efforts to find the killer, although largely on his own and not as much through the police. Still, many may consider these part of a cover-up or convincing acts to deflect guilt. Also, John was ruled as not having written the ransom note by most experts. And John has no background that would suggest he would engage in criminal behavior against his own daughter. Most importantly, per the police's priority since 2008, John did not match the unknown male's touch DNA found on Jonbenet's clothing. Patricia Ramsey. Patricia Ramsey was a top suspect in the murder from very early in the police investigation, with valid reasons. She had the most frequent access to Jonbenet as she was her mother and also her personal coach in their intense beauty pageant competitions. Patsy is reported to have become very angry with Jonbenet over her bedwetting problem. Patsy was likely under a lot of stress from her cancer treatment, her daughter's beauty pageant participation, and her busy and often go-it-alone lifestyle. She was not ruled out as the possible author of the ransom note. She may have bought the duct tape used in Jonbenet's mouth during the murder, and her paintbrush, ink pen, and paper pad were used to write the ransom note. Beaver hair was found in the garrote. Patsy was reported to have owned a beaver hair coat, which was never retrieved by police. Patsy's behaviors after the murder seemed odd to many, such as the looking through the palm incident, and was later guarded, vague, and uncooperative with the police during the investigation. As Jonbenet's mother, Patsy had the most frequent contact with Jonbenet. She maintained near constant company with her, so she would have the most information about Jonbenet, her physical and health details, or any information about past sexual incidents. Also, she would be in a position to spot people that may have followed her, surveilled her, or that acted or said anything inappropriately or strange about Jonbenet. So the police focused on Patsy due to this primary access and knowledge. Patsy was the primary caretaker of Jonbenet. As such, she would have been impacted the most by the child's reported issue of bedwetting. As Patsy's reported attention to detail and cleanliness, it is possible she may have lost patience dealing with this issue at one point. And other factors may have contributed to a possible bout of rage at learning the incident had occurred on the night of the 25th of December. There is evidence to support that bedwetting occurred on that night, as Jonbenet's sleep clothing was heavily urine-stained, and the child's body was found changed into clean, oversized underwear and wrapped in a white blanket. It is unclear, however, if the urination occurred before or after her assault. Patsy was likely under a lot of stress. She was reportedly somewhat obsessive with decorating and remodeling her home, was deeply involved in her daughter's beauty pageant competitions, and was an active member of her community. She was also often doing things alone, as her husband was often busy with his demanding and thriving business. These and other time and resource-consuming things must have produced high levels of stress on her, especially during the time when she was receiving cancer treatment. I believe these may have impacted Patsy's mood and psychological health in ways that could produce mental crises or bouts of rage later on. Many believe she lost it on the night of December 25th, after finding that Jonbenet had urinated herself. The police investigators tried to find if any of the items used in Jonbenet's murder were purchased by someone in the home, likely for the planned assault or the staging. Two items that may have been used solely for the assault was the duct tape and the cord. Unlike the paintbrush, the ink pen, and the paper, any remainder of these two items were not ever located. The origin of the cord was undetermined, But there was a purchase receipt discovered in the home, believed to belong to Patsy, of an item that matched the aisle number and exact price for a roll of duct tape from a local hardware store. It was a purchase likely made by Patsy, but it was not decisively determined if it was indeed duct tape, since the item was not described on the receipt. Patsy always denied buying the duct tape. But it must be said that even if she did buy the duct tape, it would not necessarily mean that she premeditated the crime. Suspiciously, there were fibers in the sticky part of the tape that likely came from the sweater Patsy wore that night. But it is unclear how the tape was handled when it was taken off from the body by John. But reportedly, it was removed before John carried the body upstairs and left on the blanket which had wrapped the body. The ransom note bore many similarities to Patsy's writing. So many in fact, that the likelihood of it matching her writing style by random chance was low enough to prevent her dismissal as a possible author of the note. And it was her pen and paper pad which were used to write the note in the house before or after the murder. These bizarre actions are believed very unlikely in a real ransom case, as historically most other ransom notes were written well before a kidnapping. Additionally, the content of the ransom note indicated the work of an inexperienced criminal, or person only portraying to be a criminal, and it was determined by most experts that the note's intent was to deceive the reader. Patsy always adamantly denied writing the ransom note or knowing who did, and most handwriting analysis experts did not go so far as to pin her as the author with complete certainty. The garrote, believed to either asphyxiate Jonbenet, or to make it appear like she was asphyxiated, contained a single hair believed to come from a beaver. It was never determined as to the origin of this hair, but Patsy reportedly owned a beaver hair coat. This coat, if it existed, was never turned in nor analyzed by police. Patsy's paintbrush was used to fashion the garrote. It was broken in half by the attacker, and a shard from it was later found near the home's boiler room. It is debated whether Patsy would have the strength to manually break the paintbrush in half, as it is believed occurred. Many believe Patsy exhibited odd behaviors during the early investigation and thereafter. Some believe the recorded 911 call wording and tone was not genuine and scripted, as she used words like, "We have a kidnapping," and "I'm the mother." Furthermore, many believe she hung up the phone too quickly and unexpectedly, claiming that most would keep the only lifeline to help as long as necessary. But she may have read the threats on the ransom note against contacting the authorities, and kept the call short as a precaution. Many believe she lied about Burke being awake or sleeping that morning, and about not reading the entire note, raising questions as to why she would need to lie about those things. Many found it odd she was wearing the exact same clothes as the night before. That would be a departure on her expected behavior as a woman highly concerned about looks. After finding Jonbenet's body, some believe that her reaction was not genuine. One police investigator pointing out that she scoped around with one eye through her fingers on her face as she cried. I happen to be among the ones that disagree that her behaviors were abnormal, out of place, or disingenuous. However, I believe that Burke being sleeping during the whole initial finding seems to be a lie, perhaps to stick to their original story. Lastly, Patsy's recollection on exact happenings that night and morning seemed to get vague and lacking detail as the days and weeks went by, perhaps to protect from suspicion from police. But many believe this lack of recollection may be to deflect actual guilt or incriminating knowledge. She was also visibly belligerent at any suggestion of her possible involvement, or the involvement of any of her family members. Patsy did it. Theories. The Stephen Thomas bedwetting theory is a leading theory that paints Patsy as the enraged accidental killer, where both parents consequently colluded to cover the whole thing up. Investigator Steve Thomas of the Boulder Police Department was thoroughly convinced Patsy was the likely killer, given the available evidence and as he and his team interpreted it. The ransom note, the likely staging of the crime scene, the recurring bedwetting, the bowl of pineapple on the table, the undigested fruit on Jonbenet's stomach, and the lack of significant evidence of an intruder or break-in. These and others convinced the investigators that Patsy could have accidentally killed Jonbenet, and in an attempt to protect herself from accountability and family's image, colluded with John to cover up the killing. The Marcel Elfer's compromising position theory is another leading theory that pins Patsy as the accidental killer, as the ransom note's author, as the mastermind behind the cover-up. Elfers posits that Patsy surprised John sexually molesting Jonbenet, and reacted with rage and violence. He propounds that she attempted to hit John with a heavy object, perhaps the Maglite flashlight, and she misses John, who was holding Jonbenet, and instead fatally hits Jonbenet in the head. During the chaotic scene, John and Patsy may have scuffled while Jonbenet is unconscious. They then believe Jonbenet was dead and too late to save, and Patsy decides to save the rest of the family from further problems. She wants to avoid prison and wants to maintain access to her son and cancer treatment. And the theory goes, Patsy blackmails John into cooperating in exchange of keeping his assault on Jonbenet a secret. Patsy then pens the Ramsey note, and John stages the crime scene complete with a garrote and duct tape over the mouth. In 2023, I proposed what I call the sleepwalker theory. This theory points out the stress, medications and pressures felt by Patsy during the holidays of 1996. And with these she has a period of little or no sleep, leading to temporary amnesia. With that, poor judgment and hallucinations may have occurred. That night she may have woken up and may have unconsciously woken up Jonbenet, brought her to the kitchen and prepared her the late-night snack of fruit and tea. As Jonbenet complains of tiredness and wanting to go to bed, Patsy may have become aggravated and resistant. And as Jonbenet tries to sneak to her room, Patsy may have thought her daughter was possessed by a demon or something along that line. I posit this because of the reported religious nature of Patsy, and this may have exacerbated fantastic supernatural beliefs. Patsy then chases Jonbenet with the heavy flashlight and deals the fatal blow to the head. At realizing Jonbenet is unconscious and perhaps dead, Patsy may have ritually attempted to revive her through prayer. This is suggested because at finding the body, later on December 26th, Patsy is said to demand that Jonbenet is raised from the dead, as was Lazarus from the biblical story. Patsy then perhaps passes out and does not wake up until hours later with full consciousness. She then stages the scene and writes the ransom note. She then notifies John and threatens to expose him as a child molester if he does not cooperate. John, admitting he's cornered, submits to the cover-up and insists on his and his family's innocence to this day. Problems with Patsy did it theories include: no definitely incriminating DNA from Patsy was ever found on the body nor any would-be weapon. Although as mentioned, fibers from Patsy's sweater may have been found under the piece of duct tape, but were not definitively proven as such. And a beaver hair was found in the garrote cord. Patsy is reported to have owned a beaver coat, but no match was determined. Also, there is no definitely convincing criminal motive. Patsy always displayed normal, motherly and loving behavior toward Jonbenet. No history or suspicions of past abuse were apparent. And Patsy's behaviors after the crime do not match those of someone guilty. Like many, I believe she was visibly and audibly distraught by the event, and find it unlikely she was faking her behaviors shortly after the murder. Patsy died of returning ovarian cancer in 2006, and she held her and her family's innocence to the very end. I personally find it very unlikely that she would accidentally harm her own child and not call for medical help immediately. And there is no public record of any mental illness with her. Even less likely is the sexual assault, actual asphyxiation or staging of it with the garrote. And I find it less likely that she penned the long and vicious ransom note before or after the killing of her dear daughter. However, all these become a bit more likely if Patsy was mentally disturbed, or temporarily insane, at the time of these events. But again, there is no evidence of that. Fallout. There is widespread consensus that aspects of the crime scene were staged, mainly because of the deceiving and outlandish nature of the ransom note, but also because of the likely staging on the garrote, taping of the mouth and superficial tying of the hands. And there is still heated debate as to the primary cause of death, the garrote or the blow to the head. However, there is no consensus as to why the staging was performed, if indeed it was staging. Was it to cover up a real ransom attempt gone wrong? Or was it to confuse a sexually motivated crime with a fake ransom attempt? To me, the latter seems more plausible, as the body was wiped clean, wrapped in a blanket then hidden, indicating care for and knowledge of the victim. There is also no consensus on when the ransom note was written, before or after the murder. If before, a real Ramsey attempt gone wrong seems more likely, as well as it being perpetrated by an intruder. If it was written after the murder, staging to cover up an accident or crime likely took place. And if the note and staging took place after the murder, it would seem less likely that an intruder did it. A murderer would likely not take extra risk, time and effort to stage the entire thing, even if the hopes of getting a portion of $118,000. The case remains unsolved, and it's largely due to the early investigation blunders. A tragic combination of complacency and unpreparedness by the police. And, I believe, continuous bad decisions that continue to this very day. To quickly recap, the crime scene was not secured initially. Evidence was disturbed and destroyed. The Ramseys were not officially interviewed separately by experienced investigators for over 6 months. There were multiple pieces of important evidence not analyzed. And ultimately too much weight was put on touch DNA evidence. Officially, no one in the Ramsey household remains under suspicion. They may have evaded accountability due to the plethora of inept police investigation mistakes, early legal protection, cunning cover-up and staging, or a combination of these. Or they indeed are only victims of a heinous crime done by one of the most evasive and enigmatic intruders in history. Patsy died in 2006, firm in her and her family's innocence. And John and Burke adamantly maintain their innocence to this day. Ultimately, I and many believe that too much weight was put on DNA evidence, very little on the circumstantial evidence, and not enough on the actual evidence at hand. It must be admitted, if an intruder entered the house and committed the crime, he or she left very little evidence of entering, being there, or exiting the house. It must be recognized the low probability of an outsider pulling this off. John himself is quoted as saying, "This must have been an inside job as no one knows about that room in the basement. And no obvious weapon for the head trauma was ever found." Again, the Boulder Police Department seemingly laid the entire case on touch DNA, exonerating John and Burke Ramsey from any suspicion due to it. In fact, touch DNA exonerated 2 confessing sexual criminals and several other known sexual perpetrators that lived near the Ramseys at the time of the murder. Many believe the exoneration was partly ushered by pity of the Ramseys, a wanting to make it right in the public's eye, or as an attempt to clear the name of the police department that botched the investigation so badly it has not been solved after almost 30 years. Update. The case remains open and apparently under investigation nearly 3 decades later. In December 2023, the Boulder Police Department convened a panel of outside experts, known as the Colorado Cold Case Review Team, to review the Jonbenet Ramsey homicide investigation. This review was part of a new strategy to generate additional investigative recommendations and determine if updated technologies could produce new leads. The team included experts in various fields, including DNA analysis, forensic science, and law enforcement. The goal was to thoroughly re-examine the case and explore all possible avenues for solving the crime. During its year-long analysis, the Colorado Cold Case Review Team digitized all evidence in the case and created a searchable database that includes 21,000 tips, more than 1,000 interviews, and samples from more than 200 people, including handwriting, DNA, fingerprints, and shoe prints. In all, the case file contains nearly 2,500 pieces of evidence and nearly 40,000 reports, according to Boulder Police. The Boulder Police Department said its detectives, along with the Boulder County District Attorney's Office, are in the process of reviewing and prioritizing the review team's recommendations. The police department said the recommendations will not be made public, to preserve the integrity of the investigation.